Hello, my friends. My name is Joe. I hope you're doing well today, wherever or whenever you're watching this. We've been doing a series in the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus kind of lays out his manifesto for his kingdom, if you will, or how regarding Jesus as Lord translates into our everyday life and who we are as people, who we are in society and culture in the world. And we've done a lot of Beatitudes so far. But today we're looking at verse 10 of Matthew chapter 5, which is, "Blessed are the persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." If you're reading this for the first time, at first glance, like many of Jesus' statements here in Matthew chapter 5, it can almost seem a little bit confusing, right? That in verse 4, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn." And in here he's saying, "Blessed are those who are persecuted." The idea of blessing and mourning or persecution or suffering, they seem to be in separate camps, right? They seem to be two different things. But Jesus seems to be telling us that when we are mourning in a certain way, or when we are persecuted in a certain way, that we are blessed for doing that. And like we've said before in other videos, that word blessed is a deep-rooted, true happiness, but not in a worldly way, where we have a happiness rooted in a temporary thing, but a happiness that is orientated towards God and God's will, that is truly unshakable, a deep, deep joy. So it's really important to note that Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake." He's not merely just saying, "Blessed are those who are, are suffering in general," I don't think. Jesus seems to be specifically attaching this to those who suffer for doing God's will, or for those who suffer for following God, perhaps in a world that really does not want it, or perhaps in a world where that comes with consequences. All over the world, especially recently in the news, we've seen how Christians are killed for their faith. And if you think about that, you go, wow, that's how much Jesus means to people. But on the other hand, that's how costly it can be to follow Christ. So just because salvation is a free gift from God does not mean that we have a lazy, dormant faith. No, in fact, it's the opposite. The New Testament, the book of James, says that faith without works is dead. So the result and the fruit of our faith is living a life of godliness, of following Christ, right? And oftentimes for many people, and for all of us in different ways, but in some places in more severe ways, like we've just said, or places like North Korea, where it's illegal to be a Christian and people have to meet underground with the fear of facing prison or even death. Following Christ is dangerous in different ways to different people. So perhaps the question you're thinking in your head, well, why does it seem to cost so much to follow Jesus? Why does Jesus cost everything? And the simple answer is this: it's because he is worth everything. He is worth everything. That he is the God that came close to us, that we are following the man of sorrows, is how the Bible describes him, who came to earth to walk with us, who himself suffered in his life, who was spat on, who was mocked, who died the most gruesome death you can ever think of. This is who we're following. We're not following a God in the clouds who does not know what suffering is. We're not following a God who is uninterested. No, we are following the very God who knows grief and suffering better than anyone else. So Jesus is saying, blessed are these people, not who just vaguely suffer in general, but blessed are the people that suffer for my name, for my will, for God's will in the earth. And what is their reward? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That Scripture paints this picture is that me and you will go through suffering, whether we are suffering for God or whether we're suffering in general. In this world you will have trouble, is what Jesus says to his disciples. And we live in a fallen world where bad things happen, where evil people get their way sometimes, and where it feels like evil has the last word. But that is not the picture that the Bible paints. Evil will not have the last word. And for those who are suffering, not just in general, but suffering for Christ, who are following his ways, who are suffering for his kingdom, Jesus' promise is not just that this suffering is just this useless thing that you just go through, but actually on the other side of that is the kingdom of heaven. Romans 8:28 says this, that God works all things together for the good of those that love him according to his will. So here's the picture. You are going to suffer. especially if you follow Christ. Christ costs everything because he's worth everything. But you have a God who walks with you in that. Jesus is called Emmanuel, which simply just means God with us. And what does God do with our suffering? Well, A, he uses it for our good, Romans 8:28. He uses it for his glory. And also on the other side of suffering for Christ, what is his promise to us? Ours is the kingdom of heaven, that we will be with him in eternity. However painful this side of life is, it's not the end picture. So we finish today with our Beatitudes by echoing the words of Jesus. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.